Welcome to the very first episode of the Dustin's Kaleidoscope podcast. I'm Dustin Dumas, and I'm so happy to have you join us on this new journey. As many of you may know, I've spent years in the world of media, hosting, editing, and producing television. My passion for storytelling and bringing valuable insights to our audience has always driven me. This podcast is an extension of our TV show. Here, I have more time to dig deeper into the minds of exceptional leaders from various fields. We'll uncover their unique stories, leadership styles, and the lessons they've learned along the way. For our inaugural episode, we have a special format. Instead of me doing the interviewing, I'll be the one in the hot seat. And to make this episode truly special, I've invited someone who knows me very well, my cousin, Andrew Dumas. So without further ado, let's get started.
Hi, I'm Andrew Dumas. I'm the founder of Black Millennial Investors and the Money Mindfulness Podcast. I'm excited to be here with my cousin, award-winning producer and television host, Dustin Dumas. Dustin is a producer and host of Dustin's Kaleidoscope, a show where she interviews people from diverse backgrounds about their area. Dustin's Kaleidoscope has been a television staple for over a decade, syndicated across 50 stations in 13 states. Today, we'll explore her latest venture, adding podcasting to her successful media line. We'll discuss the transition, the reasons behind this expansion, and what listeners can expect from this new format. So let's dive in. Welcome, Dustin.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for such a wonderful introduction. And thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me today.
So let's dive right in. I would love to know more about your origin story as it relates to Dustin's Kaleidoscope and how you came to create Dustin's Kaleidoscope initially.
Okay, so that's a great question because my background is not in media, TV, or anything like that. If we want to go way back to the first Dustin's Kaleidoscope 1.0, it was something to do after work. It was something to do on the weekends. I filled my time with that, and I really enjoyed it because it was an opportunity for me to meet my neighbors, meet local people like museum curators, librarians, just like a lot of different people. Fast forward to this rendition of Dustin's Kaleidoscope, which I like to call Dustin's Kaleidoscope 2.0. I have been in my current area for over a dozen years at this point. And so I focus mainly on local people. It was micro local in a sense, and that people from the two towns, right? And so meaning the two towns where the show airs and originates. But then we were able to syndicate, but the subject matter still was very local. So that's how I started, and I just really enjoy it.
So the launching of a podcast is an opportunity to branch away from just the local focus of your community.
That is correct. Not only is it an opportunity for me to branch outside of my local community, but also it's another medium, as you mentioned, the format that I currently have, which is the local one, meant that each show had to be 28 minutes and 45 seconds around there. We had to have a public service announcement in the middle of it, and it was centered around local people and local issues. Gratefully, I had a lot of people who wanted to come on the show and talk about their books, their art. And it was very much like, hey, I'd like to talk about my art because I have an art show coming up, or I have a book signing coming up. So I can still attract those types of people, but I don't want the subject matter to be so time sensitive. I'd like the information to be more evergreen. So tell me how you wrote the book and why you wrote the book, as opposed to I'll be at this particular bookstore at 7 p.m. So the podcast allows me the freedom to do a longer format, more than 28 minutes and 45 seconds. It allows me to go outside of my area, meaning my geographic area. And as a consequence, I'm able to attract people who need a little bit more time to delve into their stories and to tell me exactly why they're doing what they're doing.
Well, you know, Dustin, I'm a veteran podcast host, if you will, and I've had experience in the complexities and the challenges related to podcasts. So could you share with us how your television experience translates to podcasts?
Okay, that's another great question because I have also helped you produce your podcast and you're done with your first season. But one of the other things that is different for me is that when I was taping in a television studio, everything was set up in the sense that I would bring in my own materials to make the set my own, meaning I'd bring in something to cover up the couch. I'd bring in my own artwork, flowers, vases, things like that. But I did not have to bring in the lights. I didn't have to bring in the cameras. I didn't have to do that. So now that I'm no longer shooting in a studio setting, I still have to bring all that equipment in. So I have to bring in the lights. I have to bring in the mics. I have to bring in the cameras. And that makes it a little bit more challenging because I need more time to set up. And because of this, that means that I have to really be judicious with my time. I have to make sure that I schedule. So this is all part of the production, which you were asking me about. So this is the nuts and bolts of, I just have to do everything. It's not so different from when I would do shows that were on location because I'd have to bring all of that equipment with me. However, I have to bring all of the equipment every single time now. So that's the biggest thing. The other thing is that the production has shifted a bit in that aside from bringing all of the equipment, I have to focus on how people will hear me as well. Meaning if you have a TV show, and I will, like I said, I still will have that video component, so I can still do some of the things that I'm about to tell you right now. When I had the TV show, I could tell people to bring in their books, and their book covers would flash on the screen while they're talking about it, or they could bring in a pet or whatever it was. With the audio portion from a podcast, you have to be very cognizant of people who are unable to see whatever it is, and I have to be more descriptive because I can't just put up a book cover. I have to be more descriptive in like, well, this is how the guest is responding and this, that kind of thing. So in that respect, I have to be very descriptive in a way that I wasn't before when I had video cues, if that makes sense.
But that leads directly to your audience engagement. I want to get a perspective of what strategies you're going to use to engage your audience, ensure that they are connected both to your storytellers and their local, because you're going to be geographically dispersionate.
I love that question because I've been thinking about this a lot because one of the questions I ask myself is like, why do I want to go beyond this? This is beyond this geographic area because it has served me well. And to your point, like, how am I going to serve the local community as well as the community beyond? And simply, it's good storytelling. It's being able to have people on who are able to communicate their leadership, to tell people how they too can perhaps go on the same path that they've gone in, but just being able to tell a good story. And that story may be their life story. That story may be a literal story about something that they've written. But I think when you are able to tell a good story and when you are able to connect with people in that way, it doesn't matter if they're around the block, across the street, or halfway around the world, people will want to listen until the end. So good storytelling is what I plan to do.
Well, a part of good storytelling is not being so limited. So what's your plan there as you prepare for your interview? And what do you expect?
You can expect a longer format and it's not chopped up. Sometimes it takes a little bit more than that first 15 minutes because look, just to backtrack just a little bit, when I would have people on, I knew that they had an agenda. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I just mean that I wanted them, once they left the studio, I wanted them to feel like, hey, I got a lot of information out. I got information about my event. I got information about whatever it is I came on about, whether it was a book or a movie or a festival. They got that out. So as a consequence, the storytelling had to be very quick but concise. And I wasn't able to get a lot of color out of it because we only had that limited amount of time. And then we go to a break and then we pick up where we were. So what I'm finding is that being able to just free flow and have people say exactly what they want when they want it. In other words, we have more time and they can use as much of the time as they want or as little to get their point across, to get their story across. And that's fine. I don't feel like I'm looking at the clock all the time. The only time that I'm really aware of is for the guests. I don't want them to feel like this is dragging on. So I use them as the cue. And you can tell when somebody wants to tell a story. And many times it will take a few minutes. It'll take 10 minutes after we have been discussing something for them to, find something that they remember that they can say like, oh, this reminds me of this. And I want to tell you the story. Where that might be where, I'm looking at my floor producer and they're like, you got 2 minutes left. And the story is going to be at least 6 or 7 minutes. And so that kind of flexibility, it's been very refreshing just knowing that when we finish an episode, it's at a natural conclusion. It's not forced. So that's nice too.
I'm wondering, as you begin producing your podcast, what trajectory do you envision for your own podcast?
A lot of the people that I've interviewed locally have been people I knew, some people I knew of, but now I'm able to reach out to people who don't even live in the US. That's really nice to be able to bring someone who doesn't live in my area and have them give information not only to the people in my area, but also to a broader audience.
As a new podcaster, what are some of the key skills for development that you're looking for? But also, what would you recommend to others who are embarking on a podcast journey?
You have to be very organized. When I was doing the television show, I was also very organized then, meaning that, I'd send questions to the guests. I'd let them know what day, what time, what they need to bring, if they need to bring anything, and do they need to bring the digital print of what they are going to show me in addition to the art that they're showing me, just all of those things. So the number one thing is being organized. But again, I'm going to go back to, you asked me a little earlier about what the biggest differences are. And communication is very important. And that is because not just communicating to your guest and communicating to the audience, but also being able to communicate, people are only going to hear you on a podcast, but there's like a delicate balance here because I'll also be posting the podcast episodes on YouTube. So people who are watching this on YouTube, there's that visual element. So it's a delicate balance because you don't want to over communicate for the people who are watching, but you also want to make sure that the people who are listening only, that they don't feel left out. So if somebody talks about, there's a book that I'm reading and they bring it up during the course of the conversation and they talk about page 20, even though they may hold up the book and say like, this has been so important, it's important. This passage has been so important. It's also important to read that passage to the people who are just listening. So that's the delicate balance because you don't want to over explain everything, but you also want to make sure that you engage the people who are just listening. So communicate, being organized and being able to communicate in many different realms.
Do you have any particular podcasts that you like to follow that you've listened to for a while?
You asked about other podcasts that I've listened to for a long time. One of the podcasts that I have listened to for years is How I Built This with Guy Raz. I really enjoy that podcast. And part of that is because he has on a variety of entrepreneurs, and not all of the entrepreneurs were wealthy to begin with. Most of them started bootstrapping. And to me, that speaks to what I've always experienced. So the station that this most recent Dustin's Kaleidoscope 2.0 originated from is very grassroots, bring your own stuff, like very basic. But by the same token, you could take it where you wanted to if you desired. And so when I hear a podcast like How I Built This, it is very encouraging because, first of all, it's just normal people most of the time who just decided that they wanted to solve a problem. And that's something that a lot of us think about, whether we're trying to solve a problem of getting to know our neighbors by doing a podcast or whatever it is. And so that probably is the one, that was the first one that came to mind when you asked me about that.
Well, what is your vision?
My long-term vision to extend what I was doing with Dustin's Kaleidoscope, being able to reach more people. That's the main thing. I'm looking forward to being on different formats and opening it up to other regions. boils down to who's on the show, who can tell a good story, and not just telling a good story, but also giving the people who are listening to the show something that they can go away with and say like, I learned something today. And so that's the long-term vision, is to reach more people and to have even more interesting stories. I just want to tell more stories. I feel like this is the right time to do it. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to expanding and talking to people outside of the region. I'm looking forward to telling even more stories and having other people tell their stories. And most of all, I'm hoping that people take something away with each episode where they feel like it was a good use of their time.
Well, thank you so much. We wish you much success in the new format with Dustin's Kaleidoscope. I'm Andrew Dumas, and look for Dustin's Kaleidoscope on your favorite podcast platform.
Thank you so much for tuning into the inaugural episode of the Dustin's Kaleidoscope podcast. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and found it insightful. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star rating and review, as it helps us reach more listeners like you. Once again, I'm Dustin Dumas, and it's been a pleasure having you with us today. Stay tuned for more inspiring conversations with leaders from all walks of life. Until next time, I'll see you. Bye.